Hello, hello. This is Christina Mand-Lakhiani, co-founder of Mind Valley, and welcome to my honest conversations. And traditionally, I want to start with asking you to just leave a note in the chat to say hi, say where you are, and just to make a connection. We have a record number of RSVPs today, so I expect you guys to be very active and busy. My guest today is Christopher Kai. Hi, Christopher.
Hello again, Christina. Great to be here.
Yes, great to have you and great to talk to you again. And before we go into conversation, just a little note of official introduction. So Christopher, Inc. Magazine has called him the billionaire networker, and Forbes has recognized him as one of the top global speakers. Christopher Kai is a former American Express business strategist and #1 international best-selling author of Big Game Hunting, Networking with Billionaires, Executives, and Celebrities. He's also the founder of GPS, a Forbes featured online program, which helps entrepreneurs become professional speakers. Christopher has helped his clients generate 200 million in revenue. His newest book is entitled Wizard of Words, the 7 Magical Words for Success. And we are going to be talking about Wizard of Words, how to be the Wizard of Words like Steve Jobs. So welcome once again.
Thank you again, Christina.
I hope our connection is going to hold. I don't very often do these interviews from the office, mostly for logistical reasons, but it's really enjoyable to be here, to be in the office for me. So, but I just hope the internet will hold. So, Christopher, I want to ask you probably like the very basic question. What made you be interested in networking and research this topic and actually invest into that? Because for a lot of people, whether you're extrovert or introvert, networking is this one awkward activity which we don't naturally love doing. I know very few people who love doing it, and when they love doing it, they are generally quite intense networkers, as in they're truly passionate about that. But most people, even extroverts, I know, feel kind of uncomfortable doing this activity, mostly because I guess it is not the same as just hanging out with friends and being outside and enjoying good company. So
yeah.
What brought you into that?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for this opportunity, Christina, and I'm just inspired to know that there's so many people from all around the world, and whether you're in Toronto, this person Lillian, or Dubai, for me, I grew up in New York City, born and raised, and I talked a lot as a kid. So I didn't realize that talking a lot would make me being punished in school. So my very first image and expression of speaking and networking was actually a bad one, because they punished me for talking too much. It didn't really dawn upon me until when I was 12 years old. My uncle hired me at his insurance company in New York City. And that's when I started realizing, wow, when you build an actual client network, people start coming to you. And I saw that my uncle, who at the time was a mentor of mine, which I didn't even know the word mentor, that was a starting point of knowing that if you start expanding your networks, and network actually is a science, when you start expanding your network to people that might not be like you, might not make as much money as you or make as little as money as you, but when you start broadening your network about understanding that it actually is a science, then your opportunities become exponential. And when I started doing that in college and beyond college at American Express, I started realizing that that 12-year-old kid that lived in New York City and started working at my uncle's insurance company, I understood it from a local standpoint when I went to American Express, and now as a global speaker and have written 7 books and traveled all around the world and speaking in countries, whether in not Dubai, but Saudi Arabia or Australia. I started realizing that the more I broadened my network, it just created these amazing opportunities, whether from friendships, whether from clients. And the more I dove into the science of it and writing this book about how do you actually network with the highest levels, because what's ironic and funny, Christine, is that I never wrote a book about networking because I love it. I wrote a book about networking because I found that people needed to understand how to network and to know that it actually is a science. And what's ironic is that when you start realizing that it's a science, when you start asking questions, open-ended questions, where Harvard researchers have actually studied networking, and they found that successful small talk really came down to just asking more follow-up questions so that they felt that you were responsive and listening to them, and they felt that you were cared for. So the great thing about networking is if you actually understand the science, it really is, if you just focus less on what to say and focus less on focusing more on what you're listening to and asking questions like yourself, for instance, Christina, where you grew up and your book and your passions and some of the challenges you went through, it makes it so much easier when the attention is not on you, the questioner, it's just more on the person you're asking questions for. And if you're actually excited and you show actual expressions of excitement and of learning, then the networking part becomes very easily, and this is based on Harvard research and based on my research of writing a book. And the word Wizard of Words, so that everyone knows, Bill Gates was referenced by saying he was a minor wizard. And when he would see Steve Jobs become a major wizard and just cast spells and mesmerize people, all Steve Jobs was really a great storyteller. So the Wizard of Words is really, can you express yourself in a way that conveys enthusiasm, excitement, or energy, so the person that's listening to you or really wants to know about you knows that, wow, this woman, Christina, this entrepreneur, this very ambitious professional woman has a story to share. And we all have stories to share. So I encourage the people on the call in this webinar to really know that it's about asking questions like, instead of, hey, how are you, Christina? What if you ask, well, Christina, what are you looking forward to this week? And that opens up a much larger conversation.
I'm sure that a lot of our guests will have questions, so I do encourage you to leave the questions in Q&A, because, you know, if I don't see the questions popping on, I will forget to give you the opportunity. But I want to ask a few questions, because naturally, since I have to go to events and I speak as well, networking is part of the package, and you have to do that whether you like it or not, whether you're introvert or extrovert, whether you're enjoying it or not. So the one thing that I feel personally is that very often it's a lot of pressure and a little overwhelming, because you show up in a place where you feel that you should be doing something, but you're not sure what that should is, who you have to run for, who you have to talk to, and what you have to achieve with that. I feel that networking very often comes with a lot of expectation and pressure. I understand that you value it, because definitely being good at that pays pays in many ways, not just in money, but in many ways. But how can you learn to truly enjoy it and not to feel it like a necessity, that's something you have to do and then you can't wait to get back to your hotel room and just chill?
Well, it's a great question, Christina. And I know a lot of people have this pressure, but frankly speaking, it's about first changing the mindset. Instead of pressure, I get excited when I meet people. I get excited to learn. And I get excited because imagine every person you meet is a new friend, a new teacher, a new professor. So first, just shifting the mindset of not having so much pressure and knowing that at the time I would not be just speaking at conferences, because one thing to speak at a conference, let's say you speak at a conference, it's a different framing. But let's say for the benefit of the people on the call, I don't know what the background is. I don't know if they're a speaker or not, but if you just make sure that you research all the speakers, because there's a reason they're speakers. So the first thing I would encourage everyone to do is, if you're going to spend time and money and resources to go to an event, the very least you can do is really look at all the speakers, look at the people that you most gravitate to, look at some of the more personal qualities of them, and then literally have a screenshot of their photo there on your phone, so that when you meet them, you can actually have some actual conversation. Because what happens is, the higher up there on the profile of success, the less time they'll have for you. Now, this is not saying that you are not important. I'm just objectively saying, I have been approached so many times by different events. Christina, I'm sure you have as well. But if you're going to events, at the very least, you research the speakers, because just knowing a little bit about them conveys a sense of curiosity, but also a sense of comfort to know that you're not going blind. And if you don't have time, no one's stopping you from just spending a few minutes by looking at the actual speaker profile and just looking at some points. That's one thing. So first, it's a mindset thing of knowing that, imagine you're meeting new friends, you're meeting new professors, you're meeting new teachers. So that's one thing, to allay the concerns that there shouldn't be any pressure. And you don't want to think of the more Western way of thinking of things like, oh my gosh, I remember one time, this was literally an example, Christina, where a guy just passed out his business cards. It was the most like low level thing to do, where he was talking to me as a person, but he was just passing out business cards, and it made no sense. So you're focusing more on quality than quantity. You can go to events and say, oh, I want to get 50 business cards. It doesn't make any sense. You're better off getting 5 people you're meeting, genuinely expressing interest to, and focusing on digging deep than going wide, because it's very daunting when you go to an event where there's 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people. I can see why people are pressured. But if you look through the calendar, if you look through the schedule, if you look through the speakers, and you focus specifically on 5 people as opposed to 50, 500, it just makes it less stressful, more purposeful, and more intentional, because you're not there to meet all these people. You're there to hopefully meet a few people that you can connect with, and ultimately in the future, build this relationship where instead of just, when you think of compound interest, it's also related to compound relationships too. And to this day, I have events that I've gone to. I just spoke to someone that I was sharing the stage with 4 years ago, but whether I'm an attendee or as a speaker, it's still about relating to people that are you're vibing with, and seeing if there's potential collaborations, because there also is an intention of why you're networking. You know, when you go to
Yeah,
these
that
events,
was that was my next question, and I wanted to make it incredibly dumb and very blunt. So what's the purpose? What's the goal when you go and meet the people? When can you say it was a good meeting?
Yeah, well, that can remain to be seen after the event, frankly, because you can have the best first impression, but what happens after? And that's the follow-up, right? Like we had a call a few months ago, I think, or maybe a month ago, and it's about following up, right? But for me, in this book, I was very specific and clear. For me as a business owner, it was more like, is this person going to be a client? Is a person going to be interesting? Or is this person going to be part of my philanthropic community? So I was very clear with my intention of, are they clients? Are they people of interest? Meaning a guy that I sat on a train next to from Boston to New York years ago ended up being a former Navy SEAL sniper, was getting his PhD. So he was just a cool guy. So instead of putting all this pressure, like, oh my gosh, I'm a business development person, I need to find clients. Well, some of it might be clients. So that's asking specific questions. Other, it might be just, he's a cool person. I ended up introducing him to his wife. And lastly, I do a lot of nonprofit work. So if it was someone like yourself, Christina, where I have a homeless youth program in LA, and you're in LA, I'd be like, oh, I'd love for you to come to my homeless youth program to inspire my students with your story, right? So I was still very intentional. So whoever's on the call, if you are a more sales, business development role, or if you're an investor looking for people to invest in, it's still about what is your intention in going there? Because if you're just going there hoping for things to happen, it's not going to work out well. But if you have intention of perhaps finding certain clients, well, what are those clients? Is the room even relevant for your actual clientele? Do they make the income that you want to make? I work with realtors and wealth managers and insurance agents, and they don't even do some of the most basic research on the people there. And if they spent the time researching, because if you're going to spend the money and resource to go to these events, it can be very daunting and stressful. But if you have a clear intention, okay, you know what? I'm going to focus on meeting 3 people each day and really building a rapport with these individuals and understanding if they might be a great fit for me as a client or me as a strategic partner, but it's still having a very clear intention of why you're there. I just need a lot of people that go to events. They've spent no time researching. They spend no time understanding who they are. They spend even less time introducing themselves in a very tactful manner, and they just talk too much and don't listen.
What are the biggest mistakes people do in networking? Since you've networked a lot, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of people, a lot of different styles of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, the one I just shared, people don't spend researching. I mean, do you spend even 5 or 10 minutes researching the event, researching the venue, researching when they have lunch breaks and times that are off, researching the speakers, because that alone will save you so much time. And I'm talking about conferences that might have 100 people, 500, 1,000, but the bigger it is, the more chaotic it is. But there's always times that people might not want to hear this, especially as an organizer, but I spent very little time actually at the actual lectures. And I spent much more time during the lunch times, during the breaks, during the happy hours, because those are the times you actually get to meet them, engage with them. Because again, if you're going there to network, you're not networking when you're listening to the person on stage. You're networking whether in hallways, in the bathroom, at lunchtime. And I wouldn't spend a lot of time at lunch, frankly. I would always be the last person sitting down and always being focused on who the people want to meet. So there's a lot of strategy and researching that I spent. So I think that's one big problem that people have. But frankly, I saw in the comments that people talk about being organic. I mean, that's a bit of a loaded word because I'm intentionally smiling more. I'm intentionally having better posture. So I don't know if that's organic or not, but you have to train yourself in a way that people need to know that you're a person of presence. That doesn't mean that you have a certain level of a title. It's just saying that, do you sound interesting? Do you look like you're a professional? That sounds simple, but I meet a lot of people, Christina, that don't even look professional. And they definitely spend too much time talking. Now, again, we're talking, but you're asking me a question. But in the context of networking, you're better off saying, hey, that's a really nice necklace you have on. Just keeping it simple. Or that's a very nice tie. Or how'd you hear about this event? So just keeping it very simple and letting them talk. Because if you don't let them talk, you don't know about who they are. If you talk too much, then you don't really convey much. But even something as simple as an icebreaker, when someone asks me what I do, I keep it very simple. I'm a speaker, I'm an author, I've written 7 books, and I also help clients become speakers. So if you can't get your quote unquote elevator pitch down to an actual one breath sentence, you're not doing yourself a service. When people talk about, oh, I have so many things going on, Christopher, then usually that's either they're confused or they're not clear on what they're conveying. And that conveys a sense that they're not very professional. Unless you're someone like Elon Musk who has built multiple companies, but frankly speaking, just say that you're an expert in education, or you have a new book that's coming out on such and such. If you can't convey your introduction in one sentence, you have to work on your introduction.
Mm-hmm. So talking about introductions, I'm one of the people who has a very unpopular view. I really find it stressful when people jump on me with very intense questions like, what are you passionate about right now? What do you have to say to people like me? Do we have to change our approach and just chill about that question, or other ways you can actually network without being so
Well, I want to really go back to the first suggestion I had, which was the mindset. If you're going in thinking it's stressful, if you're going in thinking that, oh my gosh, they're going to ask these questions, then that I don't think is the best starting point. But if you go in thinking, oh, I get to share exciting stories, I get to learn, then it just changes, because just hearing you saying it's stressful, it's stressing me out, right? and that, frankly, I get excited only because there have been enough opportunities that I've met people, again, whether it's a Navy SEAL officer or a guy that I was talking to. My father's no longer here, but I remember talking to a guy who worked for the National Prostate Foundation. And apparently for men on this call, most men will have prostate cancer, but thankfully most men won't die from that, because most men will have it. But if they're diagnosed early, then therefore they're living. But like most men will actually have it, but it's slow moving. What I'm just saying is completely unrelated to business, but I was a curious man learning about that. And he was a guy that works for the prostate cancer, right? But if you have that mindset, not to think that networking is stressful, because why is it stressful? Is it because...
No, I guess, my question was a little bit reverse.
Yeah.
I don't mind you sharing a passion, but I don't like when I'm being asked about the passion before I'm asked about my...
But why is that, Christina? Because again, people on the call
because I don't know the person. I don't know the person. For me, it's important to. It's like a dance. One step at a time, and then maybe I'll be ready to share my passion.
Yeah. Well, so that's something I think, Christina, you have a good. I think all of us are different stages, right? So if I was naturally inclined to speak as a kid, now I'm more intentional, but let's say some people are like you, Christina, where you don't like people asking the questions, but frankly speaking, if you know they're coming at you and you have some of these things prepared, then it's better, right? So for you, especially if you have a book coming out, it's just, if you already know that some people might ask questions that you might be perceived as, I don't know if the word intrusive might be a word, but like the frank matter is that when you go to a networking thing, especially in America, for instance, right? Americans are generally known to network and they're known to be more outgoing, right? So if you're in certain places in Europe or Asia or Middle East, let's say I was in Saudi Arabia, I saw someone from Dubai. I had a woman that approached me after a speech. She's like, oh my gosh. And my first inclination was shake her hand. But in that culture, they don't shake hands. And I'm not fine with that, right? But from a cultural standpoint, it's also being aware of that. But there's really no way of getting around someone asking you a question like what you're passionate about. But if you think about, well, he or she is curious about that question, and if you have certain prepared responses, that's the best way to lay concerns, because it sounds like some people do find it nerve-wracking, some people do find it intrusive, but really, it's really your perspective. And as long as you have certain basic questions that you have in your mind, and you take a breath, and this is mind value, right? So just taking a breather and just knowing that everyone there hopefully has a good intention, and people might not, frankly, right? Some people might be overly aggressive, especially as a speaker, especially if they know, Christina, that you're a person of status. Some people are very aggressive. And in those instances, that's a different conversation. But if always just taking that breath and just having that open mindset of saying, wow, this person is willing to talk to me. And if you come at it with that perspective of knowing that this is open conversation. This is a person that might be a friend. And granted, maybe you want 3 or 4 or 5 conversations to even talk about that stuff or going through coffee. But frankly speaking, in the context of this setting, it's not very possible. It's not very practical, right? So ideally, it's just keeping your composure and just having a mindset of openness, but also having certain prepared answers. Again, that word organic is not something that people realize, that from a psychology and communication standpoint, you might think that I'm very genuine, which I am. You might think that I'm very smart, which I am, but a lot of these things have been scripted only because this is what if you're a living. I'm not a guy that feels like talking all the time, but I'm a professional. And if you are a professional, there's sometimes might not be happy, but if you go there with that unhappiness, that does not go well. There's one story I'll share with you, Christina, which is related to networking. I went to a networking event only because I wanted to speak there. Again, go back to my attention, okay? And there were 2 people there that all they did was sit by themselves, and they just was there essentially because they can tell their boss they were there to network. But that doesn't really convey why they should have been there, which is, it defeated the purpose. So I use them as an example where I see a lot of people that go there, they find their own friends, they're at their own corner, but why are you even there if you go into a networking event, right? So it's not easy, but if you get comfortable doing things that are uneasy and being courageous by going out there, because you never learn if you're not uncomfortable. So if you accept that networking is uncomfortable, good, then pat yourself on the back because you're going to an event that's uncomfortable. But to make it more comfortable a little bit, just speak to someone that might have a smiley face on them so they're less intimidating. But the fact that it is uncomfortable, I think is a good thing, because you don't learn if you don't grow, whether you're at a gym trying to build up your muscles or you're going to eat things that might be more healthy you're not used to. But networking is the same thing. So I encourage you to look at it from a mindset standpoint that it's helpful. It helps you grow, helps you become more strong. If there's awkward moments, great. If you feel uncomfortable, great. Because only through those experiences will you learn about yourself and about people that you're around yourself with. But if you're genuine, you're authentic, then you'll know what your tribe is and who you'll vibe with.
As you were talking, I was thinking about networking as speed dating, I think, which will probably make it a little bit more fun. At least a little more humorous. I want to give a chance to people to ask their questions, so you can leave your questions in Q&A, and Bianca will bring you up. In fact, Bianca, you can start seeing if somebody wants to join. Meanwhile, I have a few more questions. Question number 1 would be, the difference, like when you're not networking, there's a huge difference whether you have been on stage or not, whether you are someone famous or not. I would like to hear an advice for people who go to networking events as at the earlier stages of their career, where they need to build the network, they need to build those connections. They haven't maybe built their own name yet, so it's much more effort. You're not fending people off. You're actually looking for context. How do you choose who to network with, and how do you avoid the awkwardness of chasing people that everybody's chasing, and the overwhelm of knowing that there are so many people I have to meet, and I'm not sure if I can.
Again, I don't suggest you go to a networking event hoping to meet all these people. I suggest you go to a networking event hoping to meet 1 or 2 quality people over time. But this is a quick question. This happened literally last week. I was sitting with the executive at a 25,000 square foot mansion in Hollywood Hills. He has this massive event for social media influencers. After we finished talking, a young man approached me and he said, "Hey, Christopher, where are you? Just noticed that you guys were talking. It seemed like you guys were important. But here's a young man who literally approached us after we spoke. So you didn't want to interrupt us. He's only 18 years old. So he was very humble, very open. And he shared his story. And he said he's a business guy. He wants to learn how to be more business oriented, whereas everyone there were more social media. So here's an example. 18 years old, didn't know anyone there. He just approached me after we met because he thought that we were some kind of important people because we were just in our own world. But he was very humble. And so for those of you who are just starting off, just be very humble and say, "Hey, Christina, I really admire your success," but just do your best to research things about Christina or some of the speakers, because ultimately that will relate to us. Oh, wow, this young man or woman actually took the time to research us, right? So having that tone of voice that he had, not having his head higher and saying, "Hey, I noticed that it seemed like you were talking about business. and I want to learn to talk about business. So he was just very direct, going back to his intention. But his tone of voice was a man of humility, and he just had a sense of assertiveness. So again, maybe he was scared, maybe he wasn't. And I mean, maybe he was thankful that he met me, because I ended up saying, hey, look, I'm going to send you my book. I'm going to introduce you to someone on the spot, because he was from Syria. He was an immigrant. Now, again, maybe he might not have met someone like myself who is used to this and wants to help him, because I do a lot of mentoring, but everyone can go with a sense of humility and just ask, I admire success. I'd love to learn from you. And I've done this many years ago when I wasn't as successful, and I would just say, I'd love to take you out for coffee. And if they say no, I'd love to perhaps go on a 10-minute call, because the more busy a person is, the less time they have. But you don't have to shoot for Elon Musk or Richard Branson, right? Because some people come to me and say, oh, can you introduce me to Elon Musk? I'm like, it is so uncalled for, inappropriate, and unprofessional, but I see why might they want to ask. They're still asking, right? But you're better off just having a sense of humility and approaching anyone that you find interesting. Again, whether it's the necklace they're having, whether it's the nice tie or the watch, it might seem a little bit vain, but it's something simple that they can say. If someone is dressing up very polished, or they have a bow tie, or if they have a really nice earrings, there's a reason why they're wearing that, because they want to show off, as they have, I don't want to say show off, but they look like have a nice watch, right? Nothing wrong with commenting on that, because if they're clearly wearing some really nice glasses, they're wearing that because they're probably stylish, right? So if you say, hey, those are cool glasses, they're even gonna have one of two impressions. They'll be like, oh, thanks so much, or they'll just not all cool, and maybe they're overly cool for you, or maybe they're conveying too much of a cool factor, which is not cool. But those basic micro expressions, what I call them, will convey to you if they're friendly or not. If they're not friendly, you don't have to really talk to them. I mean, you don't, again, if you go in not having so much pressure, you're not going to connect with everyone, and that's okay. But if you meet people, they're friendly, you keep talking to them. If you meet people that are not friendly, you don't talk to them. And if you keep it that simple, I have something that's so basic where it's vibe, integrity, and competency. If they're an expert that you want to engage with, I have a secret acronym, Miami Vice, where they have a good vibe, they seem to have a level of integrity. If they're competent what they're doing, there's an explosion of opportunities. So you take it in that respect where you don't have to think so much about the future if you focus just on the present and just conveying a sense of authenticity, but make sure you're very concise with how you convey your message or your value, because otherwise it's not going to really convey to them that you're a person that's professional and value. Because if you talk too much and they're the person of value, you're already not allowing that person to talk.
That's true. And thank you for your answer. We have Numi here to join us and ask the question. And I see the moment as somebody joins, there are more questions coming in. I always knew that's going to happen. So Numi, if you're ready, you can ask a question now.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you. I wonder if it's
awesome.
intentional.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was so not camera ready, but I really do have a question for Chris, so I appreciate the time. So I find going into a network, I actually am one of those people who really enjoy networking, but I'm also very eccentric and quirky, and I'll come with a prepared elevator pitch, but then I try to customize this person I'm talking to, and it comes out as verbal vomit. So I'm just would love to have some tips on like, how do I keep that elevator pitch from going awry? And I think along the same lines, Chris, as somebody who is so invested in this topic, like what catches your attention when someone's elevator pitching you? I'd love to kind of know your perspective as the listener as well.
Yeah, again, since my intention, and again, I'll keep this so that I'm not a speaker and I'm going there as a networker, as a person that's an attendee, right? Because when you're a speaker, it's a very different type of framework, because they come to you, they perhaps have researched you, but to keep it simple, I still say you all, Numi or Christina or anyone on this call, should have an intention, whether, again, finding clients, but mentorship is the easiest, frankly, because if, let's say you meet someone that is more established, you can just say, hey, Numi, I really admire your success. I've done some research on you and I'm really flattered. I'm really impressed with what you've done. Just keeping it very simple. And again, if you go there and you don't know who the person is, I've asked this before. I accidentally thought this one guy was $1 billionaire, ended up being the Salesforce CEO. Can't remember his name right now. But yeah, but my point is, even on the spot, I said, hey, who is that person? that I noticed everyone walking toward. And I just went on my phone and Googled them, because just having basic understanding of who they are is very important. But let's say they're not online and you go there and you might have, again, your prepared things. But as Christina said, it is a bit like of a speed dating. And some of the things you prepare, it's like what Mike Tyson once said, everyone has a plan before you get in the ring and until they get punched, right? But not punching physically, but I'm just saying it's hard to have this script if they're going to ask you things. But if you keep it very simple and say things like, what'd you think about the event? Or how'd you get there? Or what are you looking forward to? Or I was watching this networking event with Christopher Kai and Christina from Mind Valley, and he said, a very interesting question. And I'm curious if I can ask you this question. The question is, who do you most like spending your time with? It's simple, but when you ask these open-ended questions, it allows them to open up. And again, this is based on Harvard research who studied this. When you have more follow-up questions, open-ended questions, not yes or no questions, it allows them to answer in a way that is more substantive, deeper, and it allows you to learn about them. Because again, if they only talk about their families, then only talk about their families. If they talk about business, talk about business. And that's one thing I said, Nomi, before, focus less on the questions you want to ask and focus more on the question like something as simple as, what are you looking forward to? And whatever they say, just dive deep into what they say, because the reality is, if they are a client of yours or if they want to be an investor of yours, you'll be amazed to know that at the end of the day, it's the feeling they have toward you in the conversation. It can have nothing to do with what you actually want to get out of the conversation. But if they feel that you're a person of value and that you're cool, then they'll actually do more business with you in the future. It's called the likability factor that's studied with a guy named Robert Cialdini, who wrote a book called Influence. But again, it sounds nuanced in what I'm saying, but it's really about the feeling you have that you give to that person that will give you the possibility to get whatever you want anyway. So it's less about what you say, and it's more about how they feel about you based on how you've listened to them. So it's a very contrarian view of networking, because networking seems very assertive. You're going to ask questions. To some degree, yes, but they have to be open-ended questions. But to less degree, it's really about having that rapport and understanding that connection. Because again, if you have the rapport and connection, they're going to have a higher probability of working with you in the future. And you have perhaps talked nothing about your actual work you do.
That is so, thank you for shifting my perspective. That was super helpful. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nomi, for joining us. And I actually can very much subscribe to what Christopher just said. I guess one of the reasons why I don't like the question, what are you passionate about? Because it just sounds so scripted. And my natural response is like, are you actually interested, or are you just asking because that's what everybody's is telling you to ask it? So I agree that it's not so much the question per se, it's the energy with which that question is being asked and the answer is being listened to, which I guess is probably even more important. Bianca, if we have somebody else who wants to join us, and I know we have because there are 10 questions lining up, you can bring them up, and you can keep bringing people up while we are talking. Meanwhile, I have a silly question. I love silly questions. What to do if you are talking to someone and you realize that you're bored out of your wits? What are the nice ways to end the awkward situations during networking events without actually damaging the relationships and without hurting people?
No, that's a great question. It's a very practical one too. And that happens a lot, frankly, because people don't know that they're boring, and people don't know sometimes they ramble on. So I just say very nicely, hey, I'm sorry, I have to meet up with a friend or colleague of mine, but it was great talking to you and I love your story. And yeah, you always keep it upbeat, because who wants to be told, hey, you're very boring, you ramble on too much, right? But if you just say, hey, thank you so much for sharing your story, but I have to meet up with someone. And you want to be genuine too, because usually when you're at an event, you are meeting up with someone. But I don't usually spend more than a few minutes talking to people, because again, like, I'm just speaking from a non-speaker, because as a speaker it's different, but it's really just keeping it very professional and tactful. And smiling actually helps a lot. It's so simple, but there was a researcher named from Stanford. His name is Ron Gutman, Gutman. He actually gave a TEDx talk, and he found that British researchers found that when you smile, it's the same brain stimulation as 2,000 bars of chocolate and $25,000 of money. So just smiling more occasionally or making someone else smile, that already makes you more likable. So, and something as simple as literally, Christina, hey, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm actually meeting a friend right now, but thank you so much. And then just literally you see me smiling, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that at least conveys a sense that you are valuing them, listening to me, looking them in the eye, but saying politely, hey, thank you so much for your time, but I actually have to meet someone else. And I've done that so many times, whether it's a speaker or somewhere else where, again, some people do end up talking too much. And it is what it is, you know? But if you're cordial about it and kind and you smile a little bit, it just conveys a sense that, oh, wow, they're so nice. And they took the time out to talk to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Bianca, let me know if somebody's joining us so that I know, should I go deeper into the next topic?
I think this time I can read the questions.
Okay, yes,
that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from Enhua. Can everyone be a good networker, and what archetypes make for the worst networkers too?
Great question. Everyone can be a great networker because we're all human beings and we want connection. I have this book that I'm reading recently called Social Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And this is the thing, networking is a science. It really is a science and is the #1 best predictor for career success because there are things called closed networks and open networks. Going back to how, if you know that if you meet someone, this person can change your life. This person can inspire you, can inform you, can hire you, can invest in you, right? So if you have that mindset to know that, okay, you meet 10 people, but one of those people might be your lottery ticket. And not in a oh my gosh, it's gonna make or break, but I've met so many people that have inspired me through networking. So as long as you have first a mentality and mindset that it can be exciting and fun, because it could be your best friend, it could be your new mentor, it could be your new investor, just having that mindset instead of the, oh my gosh, what do I say? What do I don't say? If I'm looking right, where's the parking? It already creates a sense of anxiety and stress that's not helpful. You always ideally want to get there early, but for sure, you schedule out your whole day, your whole event, to know exactly where you want to go and know when the breaks are, when the lunches are, because that are the premium times to actually network. And in terms of, again, the worst case scenario is just not being genuine. Like, even though I'm saying you want to be intentional, it's a yin and yang thing. I'm intentional with who I want to meet, but I also am very genuine about the vibe. And some people don't vibe with me, and that's fine. Some people you can meet that are some of the most inspiring people in the world. And if they're a bit aloof or standoffish or arrogant, they're not going to vibe with, which is fine. And just as long as you don't take things personally. I think the thing is that networking is kind of like sales. And if you're not in sales, you're not used to rejection. But again, if you accept that every person you meet, it's a hurdle that you have to climb over perhaps, but it makes you stronger. Sometimes those are happy moments. But if you go in thinking that every networking event or connection you have is going to be a good one, you're already setting up yourself for failure. But if you go in thinking that you're going to meet 10 people, and if you meet just one person that's really interesting, then that's a great form of expectation that's realistic and exciting, because it's just more realistic, because I can see how it might be scary and it's a bit awkward. And if you're in sales, it's much more comfortable. But to also challenge the people that say, oh, I'm so great at networking, those people often say that. They're often the times people talk too much, you know? So I want to challenge everyone on the call to just be very mindful of who you are, what you want to convey, and what you want to add in terms of the value. But if you focus just on those open-ended questions, you'll be shocked at how much people love talking about themselves. If you are actively engaging, looking at this like, oh, wow, Christina, please tell me more about your book. Because I actually want to learn, right? And so for all of you, all of us should want to learn, especially in the Mind Valley community. But the worst thing is just being overly pushy and aggressive and being mindful of your facial expressions. I don't know if you all record yourself and look at yourself in the mirror and actually record your voice. If you don't sound a little bit enthusiastic or a little bit energetic, why should they be interested in you? I mean, it sounds a bit harsh, but I think I told this, Christina, I had 961 interviews in 2020, and most of them are audio. And I can't tell you how many people just sounded boring. And again, it sounds that I'm harsh saying this, but the great thing is you can train your voice to sound enthusiastic as opposed to monotone. And hey, how everyone, I appreciate all of you here, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity, and I hope I can share some value. All I'm doing is changing my tonality, looking at the camera, having some enthusiasm, smiling a little bit more. All of us can do that. It doesn't matter if you're not like Christina or I, who are a little bit more on the thought leadership world, but it's about conveying a sense of authenticity, which is just smiling occasionally, looking at them in the eye, and having some level of variation in your voice. All of us can do that.
So Bianca, if there is any other question you want to voice, meanwhile, I have another analogy that came to my mind because I realized that as reluctant as I am going to networking events, every single event I've traveled to, I've come out with at least somebody who's absolutely incredible person.
See?
And the analogy that came to my mind is, when they used to dig for gold, they had to wash through a lot of mud to get the golden nuggets. I know it's not a very flattering analogy, but in a way, very often it's just this one or two people that end up on the sieve who are worth all the all the trouble. So, Bianca, do we have another question to voice, or should I go with my own questions?
Yes, we actually have one.
Okay.
What do you do when there are awkward silences between you and the person you're networking with? Also, if you lack experience, what should you say to make someone smile in a networking conversation? Good one.
Yeah. So the awkwardness, if it's quiet, again, if you ask open-ended questions they don't say, then that's where you might share things like, man, I'm so glad that I came here because, and you just state a specific speaker or a specific event. But again, be specific, because the more you convey a sense of depth and substance, then they're actually aware of who you are. But once you say that, then you say, well, what do you feel was interesting about this? Again, asking those what, how, why. But if they're not saying anything, then you can have prepared questions, because every event, they're going to be speakers. Every event, they're going to have things that might stick out. But that's where you have to take the time to say, I really found that Christina, the way that she explained her topic was very interesting. What did you think about Christina? And again, you say something, and as long as you have 2 or 3 questions like that, what or how, and then just turn it back to them, that's great. And then the other question was, tell me the second question again.
So the second question was, also, if you lack experience, what should you say to make someone smile in a networking conversation?
Yeah, that one, it could be really simple. Like I said, commenting on, I always joke about my hair, but keeping it simple and lighthearted, whatever they're wearing perhaps, or if you see things in the context of the event, it's helpful. Let's say last week I was at this Hollywood Hills thing, right? It's just being observant of what's in the actual situation. Because if you say things that are very, oh, look at the weather, it's hot or cold, the traffic's bad, you just don't want to start with saying things negative. You don't want to comment, oh my gosh, it's so hard to get here. Oh my gosh, the meal was horrible. You're conveying to this person that you're whining, complaining. That's not a good thing. So that's one thing that someone asked earlier. If you want to be a bad networker, don't bring up things that are negative, because negative things happen. And what is negative and positive, right? So I would just encourage you to be mindful that your demeanor conveys your value. Before you say one word, if you already say something that's negative at an event, you're already conveying to this person that you're focusing on things that are negative. That's not something to start off with. But if you are more inexperienced, you might, inexperience is depending on what kind of experience you have, but we all have experiences. But I would still suggest that you go in there curious. And if you've done research on specific speakers, that if you're inexperienced, you might just say, oh, I was really fascinated by this one speaker. Are you aware of this person? But again, it goes back to, did you research? Did you do any level of questioning? Because if you have 2 or 3 speakers that you actually did like, and you ask this question, oh, I learned about this person online. It was really inspiring. Did you know about this person? Oh, if not, what are some speakers that you're aware of? So the consistency that I've shared with this entire speech is just, it's so much less stressful if you have certain of these open-ended questions that are there for you to learn. Yeah.
Christopher, you just came up with a golden quote that everybody seems to be quoting. So you should definitely take note of that. Your demeanor conveys your value. Everybody loves this.
Huge.
I want to ask, I actually remember the topic that we announced, so I want to ask that question, and then if we have any more time, then I'll give space for the questions from the audience. What does it mean to be the word wizard like Steve Jobs in that context that we were talking about? I suspect I should have asked that a little earlier, but better later than never.
That's okay. So after writing this book, which I help my clients get into certain events or certain rooms or anyone they want to meet, I realized once I got them in the right room, they didn't know how to communicate. So my newest book is teaching them how to communicate. And Steve Jobs is the perfect example where he essentially created the first $1 trillion company. And there actually are 7 words. And the first word is why. What is your intention? Whether Oprah Winfrey would always say, what's the intention I have for this audience member to learn from this one guest? So she always had a clear intention on what's the outcome of this actual interview, or in this case, interview, right? And then the why is the intention of why you're there, whether it's finding business partners, finding mentors. Audience is understanding a sales-related relationship is different from a just learning about the people there or getting intel, whatever it might be. So the audience is really important because depending on the audience is how you present. And then the other ones is really understanding the fundamentals. Again, tonality, body language, words you use. There's a guy that his name is Frank Luntz. He is one of the most successful corporate communicators in the world. He's done a lot of political campaigns and corporate campaigns. And he wrote a book about words that work. It's not what you say, it's what they hear. Again, the intention behind the word. If you sound stressed out, if you look stressed out, if you have a tone of voice that's very negative, that's already conveying to that person that you're just a person that likes to talk about negative stuff. That's not good. So it's why, the intention, audience, who you're talking to, F is the fundamentals. And then it's science, sales, and storytelling, where there's a science of storytelling. There is a sales element where even if you're not selling, there's persuasion and influence involved. And then the science of things by just mentioning things like, wow, I'm just so grateful that I noticed something as simple as like this. Oh, you know what, Christopher, Christine, I just found out this really interesting thought. If you want to be happy at work, if you answer one question, do you know what that is, Christina? The question is, if you have a best friend at work, you will be happy at work. They studied 5 million people. So again, if you have some of these little gems of wisdom and just dropping that line of wisdom with someone you just met, that conveys a sense of authority, that conveys something you're interested in, and it conveys to that person, your person of authority. So that's an example of how you can fill in some of the gaps, saying, you know, I just had this really cool thought and quote I remember. And then the last one is this flow, meaning again, you do not have to connect with everyone. You should expect to connect with a lot of people. And if you ever meet me, know that I'm not always the friendliest guy either, especially if I'm speaking or I'm running to some other event, right? So just know that, accept that if you go in thinking you meet 10 people, you meet one gem, as Christina was saying, that's great. Because if you go in thinking I'm going to meet all these people, they're amazing, that's not very realistic. And in a setting of a conference especially, focus on the times that you actually can network, which is during lunch, which is during breaks, which is during the happy hours, because those are the best time when everyone's more relaxed. But do your best not to spend too much time with the same people, because ultimately, if you want to really meet people, but the vibe is so important. You really don't need to vibe with everyone. And hopefully some of this stuff was helpful in terms of the 7 words.
Yeah, we will be closing up soon. That's why Bianca disappeared from the screen right now. She has to start hosting the next event, but we still have a little time. So one logical question would be, now you just mentioned the whole formula for being the wizard of words. Is there a way to learn that with you? It's not the last question yet, but I think it's appropriate to ask it now. If people want to actually study the science of networking and maybe practice and learn, what would their steps be?
I mean, they can just email me, chris@christopherkai.com. I can even send them my book, my ebook. It gives you 20 strategies of networking. What do you do before, during, and after? The Wizard of Words book is a new book that I finished. Now I'm in the post-editing part. But to keep it simple, if you're on an island right now and you feel you're a little bit in isolation, you feel alone, you feel a little bit despair, these words is what I call bridge words into your mountain of prosperity. So you have to understand, again, where you want to go first, but where you are now. And I find a lot of people, unfortunately, Christina, where they have all these intentions and these dreams and these desires, but they're feeling isolated because, again, they have to understand their audience. They have to understand themselves. They have to understand how to communicate. And the sales and the storytelling is so huge because stories are 22 times memorable. So for all of you, just know that you have a story, but you know how to share that story, and or more importantly, you know how to listen to people's stories just by asking those open-ended questions. So I hope that was helpful. And again, please email me at chris@christopherkai.com. It's just my name, and last name is Kai. First name is Christopher with a C, and we'd be happy to first send you the ebook and the Wizard of Words. I can send you a bullet point sheet that gives you a little basic understanding. But if you look at Steve Jobs, he was a massive communicator, but he was a storyteller. And know that Steve Jobs grew up out of wedlock. He was adopted, didn't do well in school, dropped out of college. So just also be mindful that all of you have value, all of you have a story, because I just see a lot of people, Christina, they don't even see their own greatness. They don't even see their own gems of wisdom. And I'm here to point out to all of you, though I've not met you, I know that every one of you has an inspiring story to share.
Mm-hmm. We didn't get to storytelling in this interview. Maybe next time. So I'm going to. We actually still have time. So if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe. Christopher, do you see the Q&A? I want to bring it up and maybe answer another question from there since we have a little time left.
Yeah. And someone asked my email, so I'm just going to post it in the chat for everyone.
Yes,
so
please do.
Chris@christophercow.com. Feel free to email me. Michelle, thank you for putting that there.
Okay, there is an interesting question when you're done with typing up the email.
Yeah, I already did. Yep.
There's a question from Dr. Laurie. How does one figure out when and how to approach a speaker?
That's a great question. You always approach them before they get on stage. And again, if you have their calendar, and again, remember, the more successful they are, the less they're going to have time for you. Don't take that personally, but it's just reality. So I have something called CAF. C stands for compliment, A stands for ask, L stands for leave, and F stands for follow up. This is what I did with Elon Musk. This is what I did with Richard Branson. I did with all the people that are very successful. With Elon, I walked up to him and Elon, great job with the World Affairs Council. He nodded his head. I had a homeless youth program at the time. I said, Elon, I'd love to have you share your story with these homeless kids. You might save their lives. I asked for his info. He actually gave me his email and I followed up. It was a very short conversation. It was not substantive, but it was within a minute because I know for someone at his status, his success, he doesn't have time to talk, which I'm fine with, but you always do your best to get his contact information and follow up. And in the follow-up, keep it simple. Where did you meet this person? What are some things you can potentially add value? And the more successful they are, the best way to approach them, frankly, is through charity if it's at that level. Because if it's business, they're probably not going to be interested in you unless you're at that level. But in terms of the other ways, this is when I, would network, I would always find out, again, if they're speaking at 1 o'clock, I would always find out, sometimes they go there just an hour before. So I'd be waiting where the green room is right before the event. It was 1 hour before or 1 hour after, or they have times where exclusively, if you can pay for this, ideally you make investments where there's sometimes there's speaker opportunities. But generally speaking, I would definitely make sure you know when they're speaking, and it's either before or after they speak. Definitely not after, because that's when they get crowded on. So I would always get them before, but I would actually have a picture of the speakers. I would have a picture of the speakers to know what time they might be there, and I would just look for them. And I would just ask the organizers, oh, do you know where Christopher Kai is? Do you know where Christina is? Oh, I think I saw him right there. So you actually always want to meet them before they speak on stage, because once they speak on stage, Christina, I'm sure you know this, or I know this, everyone just rushes you, and that doesn't help your cause. The people that I most respect are the people who've done research, and they literally track me down before I speak, and that's where they have my attention, and they've done research. And in my case, and everyone on that stage, by the way, that are speakers, they want something. In my case, I want to speak more. So if you have a place that wants me to speak, oh my gosh, Christopher, I loved your speech. I love to hire you, right? So you immediately cut the line. But if you actually do your research on these speakers, every one of those speakers are there for a reason. Whether they want to find investment, whether they want to find clients, so keep that in mind that if you focus more on they want and less on what you want, you're going to end up getting what you want. So Gary asked, it's Gandhi, it's CALF. So C stands for compliment, A stands for ask, L stands for leave, and S stands for follow up, because you don't want to be one of those, what I call groupies. The more high profile they are, they're so used to saying, oh my gosh, Christina is so amazing. It's like they've heard it before. But if Christina gave one interview and you really remember that one thing and it profoundly impacted your life for the last 10 years, you might say, Christina, I watched an interview with you and you said one thing that really stood out over the 1,000. Like, you have to be very specific and you have to stand out. So hopefully that was helpful.
It was very helpful, and I particularly appreciated the L in that acronym. Sometimes that's the hard one. But Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I wish we had more time. And traditionally, I want to ask all the people who are online with us right now to leave a heart for my wonderful guests in the chat. And if you're watching it in recording, because I think even more people are watching it in recording, then leave a heart under the video in the comments, even if Christopher doesn't see those hearts. I think hearts transcend the distance and and the spaces. So yeah, Christoph, thanks a lot. It was very inspiring, and it made me change my mind about a lot of things. And I'm definitely going to look forward for my next networking opportunity and see how I can implement all of that and enjoy it more and feel less stressed. And yes, thank you for your time, and thank you for your questions, guys, who posted them in Q&A. And I'll see you soon again.
Thank you all. Thanks again, Christina.